Hello, my name is John Gibbons, and I'm with the Product Success team here at ServiceNow. Today, I'd like to talk about the architecture of a vulnerability response. So here we have a safe harbor notice. We're not going to be looking at anything that's forward-looking, but just in case, that's here. Some of the topics I'd like to cover are obviously the architecture of vulnerability response. That would include vulnerable items, discovered items, vulnerable item detections, third-party vulnerability entries, and then the overall vulnerable item relations, and then a brief demo of how to take a look at some of the architectural elements. So first off here we have vulnerable items. So on the vulnerable item form, right, we have a lot of references. We have references to configuration items, discovered items, vulnerability entries, the vulnerability integration run, right? What integration run created this record? And then also, right, if there's any remediation efforts tied to this vulnerable item, that will show up as well. In the related list section here, we have vulnerable software, remediation tasks, vulnerable item detections, policy exceptions, any related services, and then vulnerability state change approval records. Down here, we have the triage and risk analysis elements. So a lot of these here will go ahead and affect other referenced fields on that vulnerable item. For example, vulnerability calculator, right? That will obviously touch vulnerability risk, the risk score, and the risk rating. The remediation target rules will go ahead and touch the remediation target and the rule that was applied to it, right? The vulnerability assignment rule will go ahead and touch the assignment group field on the vulnerable item, right? Any exception rules would touch that vulnerable item, as well as any exclusion rules would touch the underlying detection and prevent the VIT from being created. And then also here in vulnerability details here, we have third-party entry, CWE, NVD, and then vulnerability solutions. These would all tie back to this vulnerability entry record here. Okay. In the discovered item structure, we have configuration item that discovered item is tied to, what integration run was used to bring that in, right? In the related list, we have any detections that could be tied to, and then any vulnerable items that discovered item could be tied to. And then down here in the triage and risk analysis, right, there's a reference to the CI lookup rule on this discovered item record, and then classification groups and rules. Okay. In the vulnerable item detection here, we have configuration items, vulnerable item, vulnerability entry, the integration run, and then the discovered item. And then obviously, right, we've got the same vulnerability details down here, all tying back up to the vulnerability entry record. Next, we have the third-party entry. So in the third-party entry record, right, there's references to the CWEs, the NVDs. These are your CVE records. The vulnerability integration run that was used to bring it in, any vulnerability solution that's tied to this third-party record. In the related list, right, we have links to exploits, vulnerability references, solutions, vulnerability exploit frameworks, vulnerable items, and vulnerability malware kits. And then again, on the triage and risk analysis, right, there's going to be any kind of vulnerability risk calculators on that, and then obviously classification groups and rules. Finally, we have the vulnerable item relations. So this kind of shows how everything is tied together from the vulnerability item here. Right, so you can see the vulnerable item is tied to the vulnerability entry, which is then tied to, typically, right, it's third-party record, but for different integrations, it could be tied directly to the CVE. Also, right, any of the related lists, right, obviously it can touch all of these. Vulnerable item detection is a related list in the vulnerable item form. It's just an embedded related list, so, but it's still a related list. Right, and then you can see we have another section of related lists that are tied to these vulnerability details here. Right, and then we have the triage and risk analysis. These are all tied to the vulnerable item here. As far as the main reference fields, right, we have vulnerability entry, discovered item, configuration item, remediation effort, and then we have the vulnerability integration run, which is tied to the specific integration instance. Okay, just a quick demo. This is how so when you go into your to your instance here, if you want to kind of see the relationships of what vulnerable items have, right? Obviously, you can just come to the list field. You can go to sysdb object as well, but you can go here to configure table, right? If you come down here, you have a show schema map. In here, right, it's just going to show this, right? You could show any reference tables. So obviously, you're going to see a lot of the same things that we talked about here. If you want to show things that are referencing the vulnerable item, right, you can see here we have a lot of many-to-many tables, as well as any kind of detections and anything else. So this is a handy tool when you're trying to figure out, you know, how everything is kind of related here. You could show both. It kind of gets a little bit busy, but hopefully you get the idea. That is the end of our demo. So in summary here, we talked about the vulnerable item structure, the discovered item structure, the vulnerable item detection structure, the third-party vulnerability entry structure, and the vulnerable item relations. So for some more information here, I've included a few links, right? Obviously just a straight doc site, and then just a general overview of vulnerability response. Thank you and have a great day.